So let's talk about the role of the pelvis in a standing yoga practice and how it affects the body. While I'm standing here with my shirt tucked in, you can see my waistband on my pants is level. If I place my hands on my waist, each side is level too. Imagine that the waistband is the lip of a bowl, and I can tip this bowl forwards. This is called forward pelvic tilt or anterior pelvic tilt. I can tip this bowl backwards. And if I tip the bowl backwards, I feel the front of my core muscles, namely my rectus abdominis here, mainly my rectus abdominis, engage. And if I tip my bowl forwards, I can feel my lower back muscles engage and my front muscles disengage. So backward pelvic tilt or posterior pelvic tilt and forward pelvic tilt. Other muscles here that are working are my hip flexors. If I have tight hip flexors, it will pull that bowl forward, it will tip it forward, and spilling out of the front of the bowl in my anterior pelvic tilt. This is something that I don't want to be doing all the time in a yoga practice. It happens when the core is weak and or the hip flexors are tight and there are other muscles engaged or other muscles involved too. So if I'm standing in this neutral position here with my legs side by side, hip or shoulder width apart, it's quite easy to keep my pelvis neutral, my pelvis level. If I step into a lunge, you can see from the side here a crescent lunge or Ashta Chandra, 8 moon pose. Because one hip is in extension, it tends to tip my bowl forward. So when people sink in low into this lunge, lift their back knee, and then bring their arms overhead and back bend here, what are they actually getting into? Well, mainly engaging the lower back muscles. A little bit of front opening, but as these muscles are really not engaged, and I'm in this forward pelvic tilt anyway, I'm really not doing much to the hip flexors in this leg. So, how can I change this? I can start with a neutral pelvis. I start higher, I neutralize my pelvis, and then as I lower it down, my back knee will bend slightly. I'm going to keep my pelvis as neutral as possible and take the leg that is this back leg, the hip that is attached to the back leg, and slightly try to rotate this forwards. When I do this, I can start to feel these hip flexors releasing. If I want to change this, I can tip my pelvis forward, not feel my hip flexors release. And then I can neutralize my pelvis and feel my hip flexors start to release. That's in a crescent lunge. The same happens in a low lunge, Anjaneyasana, or any other position in which I have my hip extended on one side. If I come up from the front, you can see that my hands are on my waist is level. I'm going to try not to drop one hip, okay? And as I tip forward into a forward fold here, I want to keep my knees bent. You never want to lock my knees in a forward fold. Now I want to tip my pelvis forward. Keeping my knees bent takes pressure off my lower back. And as I keep my pelvis tipped forward, my shoulders back behind me, I'm trying to keep more space between the lowest part of my ribs and my waistband. I tip forward, still in my back bend. If I were on hands and knees right now, I would be in a cow pose, not a cat pose, but a cow pose. I can come down as far as I can with a straight spine. Once my lower back starts to round here, I don't need to go any lower. I want to feel the stretching sensation halfway between the back of the knees and the sit bones. So somewhere around the middle of my hamstrings, which is called the belly of the muscles, okay? Once I come down to this position and I want to rise back up again, I'm going to squeeze those muscles, engaging them. I'm going to squeeze my glute muscles. I'm going to draw in where my belt buckle is, suck that in, and I'm going to come up in the back bend, leading with the back of my head, and neutralize my pelvis at the top. If I do that in a half sun salutation, it would look like this. I would draw my arms overhead, not allowing my lower back to collapse, keeping my core engaged. And as I come forward, I tip my pelvis forward, sticking my bum out, sticking my ribs out, forward pelvic tilt, and drawing in where my belt buckle is. Keeping my arms behind me, and fold all the way down, and just to relax in and allow my lower back to take a little bit of a release here. From here, I come halfway up. And I try to find this back bend. My knees are still bent. I can feel this halfway between the back of my knee and my sit bones. Then I fold forward again into Uttanasana. Then I'll look up, squeeze my hamstrings, squeeze my glutes, suck in where my belt buckle is, and use those muscles to pull myself up. Coming up to the top, I'm going to drop the tailbone underneath a little bit, drawing my front of my ribs in, bringing my arms overhead. And then big circle, hands behind me, open up the chest and shoulders, and bring palms back to prayer. That's a half sun salutation. What I don't want to do again is to lock the knees and dive down. Once I roll down with my knees locked, there's massive amounts of pressure on my lower back. I'm doing it more harm than I am good. Instead, I want to find this straight back as I fold forward, using my larger muscle groups to pull me up and lower me down. If I drop down onto hands and knees here, this is cat and cow. I find my neutral pelvis, and then I pull myself into a forward pelvic tilt. Try to stick my bum up in the air, draw my shoulders back away from my ears. And then I'm going to tuck under and ground and look back towards my belly button and find this backward pelvic tilt, position in which I don't want to be in that standing forward fold. Shoulders back away from the ears. Here's my cow pose. Looks like a sway back on a cow. Here's my cat pose. Looks like a cat stretching. Forward pelvic tilt, backward pelvic tilt. We can also see this in the warrior positions. If I come to a warrior 2 pose, I'm stepping into a long lateral stance. I'm going to take my back foot, turn it slightly inwards. Take my front foot, face it straight down the mat or straight to the front of the class. With my waistband here, I'm going to place my hands on my waist, try to do the same thing that I had when I was standing. With my legs straight, I can find my neutral pelvis. I can find my waistband is level, I'm not spilling anything out of that bowl. As I lower down into this lunge, into this warrior 2 posture, with my knee approximately over my heel and my weight even on the ball mount of my big toe, ball mount of my small toe, and the heel of my front foot, what happens is my body wants to tip forward, my pelvis wants to tip forward and spill out of the front of the bowl. What I would like to do is keep that waist level and sink a little bit into this back hip. I'm not going to lean over the front leg. Keep my body upright. Keep my tailbone dropping slightly. Keep my bowl as level as I can. And if I come down too low, it's impossible to do that, so this bowl will tip forward. We don't want to go too low. Further is not better. More is not better. Okay? So here's my neutral pelvis. Now I can do what I want with my arms. I can bring my arms out in what people consider the classical version of Warrior 2, or I could bring my arms here, or I could take a different bind, or I could take reverse prayer. Doesn't really matter what I do with my arms. What I'm concerned with is the pelvis. Which muscles are engaged? Which muscles are working? Another thing in this warrior position is that I don't want to be facing 90 degrees from where my left knee is facing, because this left knee here will collapse inwards. If you can do the lateral splits, the side splits, then you can do that. Most people can't do that. So I'm going to turn this back foot in a few degrees, keep my knee aligned approximately over my heel with the weight even on that front foot, And this will turn my waist slightly towards the front of the mat in a natural position where I want to be. Don't try to turn more. There's no point. You're not getting any more out of it. If you want to open your hips in that way, there are far better postures to do it. So here I am in my Warrior Two position, neutral pelvis, belly button, pelvis facing slightly forward, not directly out to the sides. If I want to add a slight twist here, I can add a twist, or I could reverse into a reverse Warrior Two or something like that. To do this same thing in a triangle pose, for example, I will now take approximately a leg's length stance, or I could do this from a longer warrior stance. Take a leg's length stance, do the same thing I did in Warrior Two. Taking my back foot, I'm going to turn it in slightly so that I can align my hips slightly facing forward because they don't want to open 90 degrees out from this leg. I'm going to keep my thigh, the point of my hip to my knee, pointing towards my foot with a slight bend in this front leg. Again, when we're in a forward fold, which triangle pose is, hip flexion on this front side, I don't want to lock the knee in that forward fold. I'm going to keep a slight bend, slight external rotation on that leg, place my hands on my waist. I'm going to press this front side down and back. So I'm actually turning slightly toward the floor. And I'm going to reach with my shoulder or my armpit on this lead side. I'm not trying to get lower. I'm trying to get longer. I'm trying to reach my head for the wall beyond. As I come down, I find the place where my spine, it can be straight. I'm not laterally flexing down, trying to get lower, hanging my head down here. I'm keeping my spine straight. Now when we come forward, because I'm in hip flexion, my pelvis wants to tip forward and my lower back wants to collapse, gauge here. My core wants to disengage. So I'm going to try to do the opposite. I'm going to try to slightly, gently, not forcefully, gently draw the front of that waistband closer to my lower ribs, pressing my tailbone towards my back foot. I'm going to draw where my waistband is in tight, like I'm trying on a pair of really tight pants, okay? And I'm really desperate to get them on. From here, I will reach forward. I can put weight on this hand, bring it down to my shin, or in the Ashtanga version, reach all the way down past my big toe, twisting my back and so on, something I don't encourage. Or, if I decide I would like to work my core a bit more, the oblique muscles down here, I will keep this slight bend in my knee, and I will put no weight on this lower hand. I may even bring it to half prayer. Upper hand can go wherever you want. It really doesn't matter. What I care about is that I'm drawing in tightly here, my pelvis is neutral, my knee is bent, and my oblique muscles around the side here are holding me up. In other words, I'm using my core to hold myself up. When I come out of this, it's the same as I did in the forward fold. I'm going to engage my glutes and my front leg, my hamstrings on my front leg, and squeeze them, drawing in tight to pull myself up, before maybe switching to the other side and doing the same thing. That's how I would engage my core to protect my back and get the most benefit out of a triangle pose.